classes, they're not the ones that are kind of posing that threat to you. I think that matters, and I think that that can make a difference to the case that you gave of the people who give, who give housing to terrorists. It seems to me there's a really, really important difference between those. So my view on this is that responsibility for unjust aggression is a necessary condition, but it's not always a sufficient condition. And it seems to me that there's a very, very strong presumption against targeting people that, as you say, are defenseless, even if they may have contributed, and maybe even contributed culpably, to the wrongful aggression of others. I think there are lots and lots of very difficult issues kind of buried within that, but just really briefly, that's my view.
Jeff, can I just jump in?
I'm going to, because we're running out of time, so I got 3 people left who I'd like to ask questions, so I'd ask those 3 to please ask very succinct questions, and then we'll come back for a quick rejoinder and move on. So these 2 gentlemen here, and then Reed, whichever one of you 2 would like to go first. Very succinct, please.
Thanks very much. As I understand the talks on the panel and Dean's talk, there's material conditions for their beating, preventive attacks, and there's liability conditions. So if we think about Iran, we want to think about the costs, we want to think about the threat, we want to think about the liability. But what if the costs are low? Does it really bother us about liability, about violating sovereignty? I'm thinking here the fact that there already has been a preventive attack in Iran, a preventive cyber attack. And the question is it the same moral framework?
Good question.
A different moral framework for thinking about cyber attacks. Or in the words that Joe used, if it's safe and it's legal, do it really bother us and it's not rare? Can it be more common?
Okay, sir? Very short.
To come back to the fundamental distinction between preemption and prevention, because I'm still skeptical that we can maintain the kind of clear line between the main arguments on the table. And I'm thinking particularly of a case in Gentili's lectures on the laws of war in the late 16th century, where he argues that it would be just for a state, a group of states, to attack either Spain or the Ottomans, even if they're not posing an imminent threat, because their goal is clear: to mass power, clear from the facts on the ground. And he says that we have to act while there's time. Now, the overall argument sounds preventive, but he's changing the terms, or he's stretching the category of imminence to mean acting while there's time. I just am puzzled whether we can maintain a clear distinction, and if not, whether we can make as much use of it as we're trying to do.
Reed.
My question sort of mashes together the 2 categories of elective war, making a choice about a war, whether it's preemptive or preventive. I'll just preface by mentioning when I was in Iraq as a field historian, I was interviewing an infantry company commander. He asked me to turn the tape recorder off at one point, and that's when he told me about the 2 dead babies they found in the house that his company had been engaging. They killed them. And I want to suggest that rather than requiring that we only are targeting legitimate combatants who are culpable in some way, that, and this may be a question for the professional military as a group, the CJCS, who hasn't been mentioned in the deliberation so far, we tell people this is what war is going to be like. Innocent people are going to be killed. Maybe more innocent people, completely innocent people, non-combatants, etc., than combatants are killed. So whatever it is that we're justifying or doing this for has to be for such a good reason that we are okay with this happening, probably on a large scale. Someone mentioned the indeterminacy of going to war. My equivalent is what you're sort of doing, you're opening up your neighbor's back door and you're taking an angry, if well-trained Doberman and throwing them into the back door of the house and hoping things will work themselves out when you come back in an hour or 2 and get them, if you can. That's it.
What I would like to do then is start in the reverse order, and Joe will begin with you, and we'll work our way back up. And you can pick and choose from that menu of questions.
The first thing I want to do, David's presentation I think has provoked most thought on the panel. It seems to me that in your emphasis on thinking about how people make themselves liable to a military attack that's just, you are emphasizing the rights of those in the attacked country. If you're going to put it in terms of that kind of right, and I'm not sure I would, but if you're arguing on those grounds, I think you also need to consider the rights of those who are in the attacking country in this case? In other words, what are the rights of those who are taking the preventive or preemptive action? Because there's this whole universe of rights that are out there, presumably, you could posit. And those are in other words, it's not a clear-cut case of whether you're violating the rights of those in an attacked country in the case of a preventive or preemptive action. You've got, that's one set of rights, but you have a contending set of rights, and contending populations of rights. I also, just to pick up on the notion of time, am struck in all of the distinctions between prevention, preemption, and actual response to an aggression on the emphasis on time, and how time and, in a sense, empirical analysis or empirical awareness becomes the decisive factor for what's just and what's not. It seems to me that if there's a set of outcomes that are just and a set of outcomes that are unjust, and you view time as a whole, they are unjust or just without regard to when they actually occur. And I wonder if in arguing that the sequence of events is what produces the justice, whether it's the attack that occurs, how somebody gives up his rights, that we ignore the actual final purpose that we're trying to achieve to begin with.
Steve.
I guess the only thing I could really address is your question about thresholds for cyber war. And one thing I would say is on my own experience, again, going back to covert action and any type of sort of hopefully unattributable action a country might take against another country, is that my experience has been the thresholds remain very, very high. General Hayden, former director of Central Intelligence, was here at the Academy earlier this semester talking about cyber war. And as he said, we don't have a policy really for how to use this, and it's been handled on kind of a case-by-case basis. That was certainly my experience over the past couple of decades where I've had opportunities to work on covert action. And as I indicated in my presentation, those things get a lot of consideration. The thresholds are very high. There's a lot of discussions. I don't recall ever having philosophers in the mix, but there's always a lot of lawyers. And so you know, I'd say even if it becomes easy, and I've looked at programs where we have technical capabilities. We're Americans. We're good at technical capabilities. We can do a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, policymakers are very serious in their deliberations about, you know, is it worth it? It's kind of consequentialist view of the thing, but at the end of the day, they really do continue to weigh the costs and benefits. And even if something is quote unquote easy, or you know, there's appearance that maybe the blowback or other cost of the action is going to be low, is that there's still a lot of times looking down the road, are we setting a precedent? Could this come back to bite us sometime further down? Is that policymakers tend to be very, very careful. And so I'd say the threshold probably remain pretty high.
David.
Yeah, well, listen, thanks to everybody for your terrific questions. I can't answer all of them. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points that you really helpfully made. You're obviously right to say that we need to consider all of the rights in play, not only the rights of those in the state that we're thinking about intervening in. And obviously, you know, governments have very strong duties of care over their own citizens. If responsibility is to protect is right, we have responsibilities outside of our own state as well to citizens of other states. And it's incredibly important that we take those seriously. But having said that, you know, everybody seems to agree that there are incredibly important limits on what we can do in fulfilling those responsibilities. So, for example, pretty much everyone agrees that terrorism is off the table, even if that were the most effective or maybe even the only way to protect people within our polity. And my understanding of terrorism is that terrorism is essentially killing people who aren't liable to be killed. I mean, it's essentially exactly the same question that we have in play here. If it's true, as I argued, that in normal cases of preventive action, the people we would have to be killed are not liable to be killed, then what we're essentially debating is whether terrorism can ever be justifiable in order to protect these really important rights and goods. And most people seem to think that, you know, that is a real red line that we ought not to cross. And I want to just come back really quickly on the comment you made earlier about, you know, aren't I just a neocon who ought to be?
I withdraw the comment if you're going.
But there is a really serious point here, and I think it's a really important one to make clear. so people often say, well, you know, the Libya intervention, it's liberal interventionism, it's just Iraq and Afghanistan all over again. It seems to me that there is, I'm not sure that this distinction is in fact being maintained in the way that this operation seems to be evolving over the last week or couple of days. But it seems to me that there is potentially an incredibly important distinction to draw here, which is that Iraq and Afghanistan were fundamentally conceived as regime change operations. So they were political right through to their core. This operation and the way that it was phrased in the UN mandate and the way that potentially it might be able to be conducted can I think, show us a really different way of thinking about these interventions. If the mandate literally is to say we will prevent armed forces from attacking civilians in order to open up the space for them to engage in peaceful protest, peaceful participation in their own politics, then it seems to me that we have a recipe for a much more morally justifiable articulation of what responsibility to protect can be about. Now that, of course, might have, and almost certainly would have, really profound political consequences. You know, most people think that if the people of Tripoli were free to protest in the streets, Gaddafi probably would go the same way as Mubarak before him. But the difference is that that would be an indigenous process that the Libyan people had brought about through their own action with the protection of the international community, for sure. But that's a very, very different thing from the international community or particular states within it engaging in a direct political regime-changing intervention like we had in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, on that note, I would like to thank the panel for what has been, to me, a fascinating discussion. I'd like to thank the audience for your participation and attention. I'll be happy now to turn this over to my good friend, Ardeth.
Thank you, Jeff. Definitely a thought-provoking panel. The only comment I had is, as Steve had defended, and I think properly, the intelligence community, I'm not sure why he didn't compare it to the weather people, because if you look at that, that'd be another opportunity. I want to thank every person who's on that panel for your service and your contribution to national security and the thought processes towards warfare ethics. So thank you in that regard as well.